Perfect. Hello, everyone. I want to welcome everybody to the Maryland School for the Deaf's Middle States Association Mid-Cycle Colloquium.
I'm very excited for everyone to join for today. We have done a lot of research and action previously, and we want to share this with everyone that hopefully is listening and looking forward to our presentation.
So I'd like to start off by introducing myself. My name's Bella Finkel. I'm a senior here at the Maryland School for the Deaf. I'm also a student athlete and a member of our academic bowl team for 4 years running.
Hello, I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Mepper, last name Bashirs. I'm currently a senior in high school. I'm a student athlete as well, involved with track, baseball, football, and basketball. Also, I'm the class president as well.
Before we would get started, a few housekeeping measures for everybody. If you experience any technical issues or problems over the course of our colloquium, we will try our best to assist you with your problems. If you need any type of assistance, there should be a link that you're using that was sent out with the email. So please click on that and somebody should be able to help you with any technical issue you're experiencing.
Each presenter will be highlighted and spotlighted and have an opportunity for a Q&A session, and this is through the chat only. If there are any suggestions, comments, or different type of feedback, you can please mention that in the chat. Thank you. Also want to mention this is being live recorded via the Zoom platform.
So now we'd like to extend warm welcomes to our new superintendent, Mr. John A. Serrano, to say a few opening remarks. Hello, thank you so much, Memper and Bella. I really appreciate, first of all, I want to start off by saying welcome, and it's really an honor to present to the Maryland Schools for the Deaf Sustaining Excellence Colloquium. This is a platform for the school to have the opportunity to share and celebrate and recognize our action research process that we have been involved in since the beginning of our accreditation cycle. Now, this has really been a collective effort, as I'm sure you know, by many members of the MSD staff to get us to the point where we are today, and I want to extend gratitude and kudos to all of them. Before we go ahead, I do want to take the opportunity to recognize several of the accomplishments and successes that we've had. As many of you, I'm sure, are aware, you may or may not know, that, of course, Maryland School for the Deaf is a 2-campus school, having a campus both on Frederick and Columbia. And Columbia is celebrating their 50th anniversary this year since their opening, so we want to recognize that. In addition to that, in the past several years, we have been working to transform our school in a variety of ways. The first has been an effort to really increase our academic resources, curriculum, and supports. That involves new curriculum in ELA, as well as math, and in the sciences as well, to increase rigor in instruction. In addition to that, we have invested in Schoology, which is a learning management system to meet our students' needs, as well as support our faculty and staff, and our MSD community and families. And you'll be hearing more about that later on in today's presentation. We're also very excited that this is the inaugural year of our OCA, Orioles Career Academy, which is a program designed for our 18 to 21-year-old learners who still need some additional job readiness skills or life skills, and includes elements like job shadowing, which is a new program this year. And last but certainly not least, we have been working the last few years to plan for an extensive renovation of our Vedettes building. That building houses our CTE and transition programs. It is going to be a state-of-the-art facility upon completion, which is going to expand our CTE offerings as well as provide alternative pathways for our students. And construction is set to begin late spring, early summer of this year. So you can see there's been a lot of exciting goings on at MSD for our community. And without further ado, please enjoy the rest of today's colloquium.
Thank you, President John Serrano, for your lovely remarks. Now I wanted to introduce our director of the Colloquium. This person is also a director of the school as well, Miss Tara Holloway. She's going to make a few remarks and comments as to what we're going to be doing moving forward with the vision and what we've done from past to present.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to elaborate and provide a little bit of background on the accreditation process thus far and our progress within our action research. We have, of course, been following MSD's. We're doing sustaining excellence for MSA for our action research. Next slide. Really, our work for our action research began back in 2017. And how we initiated was through a staff survey. And at that time, we were trying to gather feedback from the staff in terms of what areas that we needed to do a deeper dive on, where we could do more to support and improve or increase student outcomes and success. And the results of our survey showed pretty much across the board a very strong theme of family engagement. That seemed to be the key piece and the key factor of student success and improvement. So from those responses, we started to look into family engagement, what that means, what our definition was, what it meant specifically for the MSD community, and all the surrounding factors that influence family engagement. Next slide. So we started off as usual with what we already know. And what we know is this: research empirically shows that when parents and families are involved in the school environment, there is a clear positive correlation with student outcomes and success. Their academic achievement typically is increased and improved. The next piece is that partnership between the home and the school environment is critical for students' social emotional learning and development. Both groups, both parties need to work conjointly and collaboratively for that social emotional learning, or SEL, development. And then lastly, we recognize that access to language at home is mission critical for student success. Our students here, their first language is typically ASL, American Sign Language. And when that language is fully accessible and used in the home, we see improved academic outcomes and we see successful academic achievement for our students. So this is what we know about family engagement. If we move on to the next slide, we can talk about what family engagement looks like. So in the course of our research, we looked at different modes and different opportunities that families have to engage and interface with the school. For example, and this is specific to MSD, we have ASL classes. We have parent-guardian workshops that are provided. We have the IEP meeting and IEP process that's annual. We have parent-teacher conferences. And then we have special events that we host here on the campuses for our families. For all of these are the most common ways and the most popular ways for our families to engage. Now, for MSD, there are some unique challenges when it comes to family engagement in any of these modes. The biggest challenge is that we've served students throughout the state of Maryland. Maryland has a total of 24 counties. MSD, our students come from 22 of those counties, so we are extremely geographically diverse. Maryland itself is typically, when it comes to land mass, not a small state, okay? So therefore, it is not easy for students and families who are from the far corners of the state to be here in person. Our families come from throughout the state, and it is not necessarily feasible for them to be here to engage with us in any of those modes that I previously stated. So this is probably our biggest challenge and unique to our school. The second challenge is the language that's used at home. Now, that's not a unique challenge to MSD. However, we have the added nuance of American Sign Language being our language of instruction, meaning that in the student's home environment, they may or may not also use American Sign Language. They might use English, they might use another language, they might use American Sign Language. It varies from family to family. And then finally, we also found that our third hurdle is family schedules. Again, not unique to the MSD community, but a little bit nuanced compared to some of the other schools because in the case of MSD, we might have families whose children, other children, go to their local community school. And therefore, that school's schedule and calendar might not align with MSD's calendar. So our families are typically juggling more schedules than other families at other schools, which sometimes poses a conflict in being able to engage and attend events. So these are all challenges that we face, okay, compared to some LEA schools. Now, from here, we thought long and hard about how we're going to address these challenges. And we realized that when it comes to engagement, to have meaningful engagement with the school, it was a two-pronged approach, and two key areas needed to be focused on. The first was access to resources. We needed to be able to provide accessible resources for all of our families. And in addition to that, we realized that we needed to provide alternative ways for engagement. Okay, those traditional modes of engagement weren't necessarily going to work for all of our families. And that goes back to the three challenges I just talked about. So we had to figure out what can we do? How can we address these two issues as part of our action research? And today, of course, we're able to leverage technology to that effect. And we decided that was going to be our focus. How can we use technology and provide these accessible resources to families and also provide other opportunities and other ways to connect and engage with the school? So that impetus led to our research question, as you see here in the slide. And our research question is, how can the use of technology foster improved engagement, involvement, education, and collaboration with our diverse MSD, Maryland School for the Deaf, families and community throughout the state of Maryland, specifically as it relates to language and social emotional development, as well as, of course, academic support, with the overarching goal being to enhance student academic achievement. After developing that question, we were able to use that to draft our overall goal. So our goal, okay, which is in our action research, is to utilize technology in order to increase family engagement, in order to increase student academic achievement. So our question led to the language of our goal. Next slide. Okay. So within our action research and as part of our goal, we developed 4 strategies. Our first strategy was we want to make communication through technology more accessible for parents and families within our community. Our second strategy was to create a digital family support center, essentially a one-stop shop where families could be able to access things like resources. Thirdly, we wanted to use that technology to connect our families together, to connect all of our families. As I mentioned, we are geographically diverse. It's not an issue of families all being in the same community and being able to walk next door to a neighbor to connect. So we have to think of alternative opportunities for our families to connect with each other. And then our last strategy is to create a user-friendly digital presence, so to speak, to improve communication between home and school. Research has shown that when the school presents as a welcoming environment, people are more likely to take advantage of that and to engage. So we want to make sure that our technological approach is also welcoming and user-friendly for our families. Now, remember, we began this with a survey in 2017. Our action research began in 2018, and at that time, we could not have predicted what was going to happen in the world. And we realized that our timing was impeccable because of the pandemic, which again, we couldn't have foreseen. And at that time, many schools, I won't say all, but many schools pivoted to an online learning experience. So they were connecting with their families and their students solely through technology. So we had the foundations ready in place with our goals and our strategies. At the same time, COVID-19 required us to make some changes in terms of those strategies. And the three biggest changes and shifts that we've had to make over the course of time is, for example, instead of having just a list of resources that we could disseminate out for families that then they could access via computer and online, we also had to provide our families with things like hotspots in order for them to be able to access those online resources so that they could do that at home. Additionally, we currently don't have that one centralized platform yet for all of our resources. Instead, what we've done is that many of our departments disseminate that information based on what's an appropriate fit for their group of families, and they share that information out at the department level. Now, we also need to have a timeline for communication because communication right now is pretty much instantaneous, and there's a lot more different types of communication that we have been forced to engage in as a result of COVID. So that timeline is not set yet. That's something we're continuing to study moving forward in terms of what that should look like. Okay. We didn't want to limit ourselves during COVID or limit our families for specific times that communication would happen. We wanted it to be very organic and on an as-need basis during that time. Now that the dust is settling, we're going to be reviewing those communication expectations and developing a timeline. So those are some of the key shifts that happened in terms of our strategies. Next slide, please. Finally, within our action research, you of course need a plan for how you can measure that success. We need to know if what we're doing is making that positive impact when it comes to student achievement and making a difference for our family. So in the case of our action research, we're utilizing three metrics. The first is benchmark surveys, which were done via SurveyMonkey. The next is looking and monitoring our online traffic, or the amount of access to see how much engagement there is from our families, how many of our resources are being accessed, how many people are utilizing that communication. And then lastly, student assessment. And that's done through MAP, Measure of Academic Progress testing. So those are our three key metrics that we're going to review later on today. And those are going to be what we study in terms of results to see what kind of impact we're making moving forward. Now, for the rest of today, the presentations are going to touch on the various strategies that we have utilized and the different initiatives that we have moved forward with in order to increase that engagement. And I hope you enjoy the rest of today's presentation. Thank you. All right, that was amazing. Thank you so much, Tara. I don't see any questions. So again, thank you so much for your time. Okay, now I would like to introduce our high school assistant principal, Mr. Chet Verning. And he is going to be doing a deeper dive about our various technology platforms that we have been using to engage with our MSD families. Chet?
Hello, everyone. I'm going to discuss a little bit of technology issues that we've been presenting. I want to talk mainly about those one-to-one devices with our students. Our students have started this prior in about 2017, and most of them mainly have been focused on high school students to have those devices pretty much on a one-on-one capability. They have Chromebooks for their access, and our efforts have been ongoing in using these Chromebooks from kindergarten all the way up into their Oriole platform that they'll be soon using. So soon they'll have their own devices if they don't have them provided from school. The whole purpose of this is to make sure that students have access to technology as well as access to the devices, all from K through 12, to make sure that they have all devices accessible so they can learn easily. Understand that every family will pay a $40 usage fee, and in discussing this usage fee, this is per school moving forward to get that Chromebook. So this K through 2, they have iPads as opposed to Chromebooks. That $40 fee will still apply. I also wanted to mention through the distance learning center that we have, we've encountered a lot of issues and also positive things with VI. We've had larger screens that has seemed to work. And moving forward, next slide. And this DL Distance Learning Day, this is unfortunately COVID-19 has impacted the distance learning. And mainly there's a lot of issues with technology. There's no question about that. This is statewide and countrywide, discussing internet options and technology usage. Today's presentation is mainly discussed on internet options as well as technology usage on how to enable these technologies. We survey every family on campus just to make sure that they have accessibility to high-speed internet. That is crucial for video platforms such as this one. And we've also identified areas that if families needed data hotspots, we would provide those as well to increase the bandwidth. And there's no question that this has been pivotal to success. We have a lot of different companies that provide internet access, and there will be discounts provided to that. And we have to mainly discuss that further. Unfortunately, COVID-19 and distance learning, it was crucial that parents played a role in their children's accessibility to learning. And there's a lot of collaboration with partners and schools, and a lot of people working from home, and that distance learning was a challenge. Through our website, we were able to use different forms with technology to make sure families were accessible. And if there were any questions, there were video tutorials made accessible to families that were helpful. We had links that if you were struggling with technology on how to figure out what to do, we had a team that would monitor traffic and support families that had issues with technology. There were a lot of requests during our COVID-19 pandemic, but we were able to quickly work through those technology issues. We had video tutorials, like again, stressed that they were very helpful in families, mainly in discussing Google Classroom, what to click, what to do. Students had more experience than families, parents, and some teachers. So it would be kind of the roles were reversed. Students were teaching the families on how to use this platform. And it was a learning transition for everyone on how to learn on this distance learning platform. So it took some time for parents to understand, but again, we stress this parent, teacher, student learning environment. Next slide. There are many different softwares and apps that we have used in this past few school years, mainly in discussing distance learning. We have the SIS, the Student Information System. It was crucial for students to gain information as to their grades, their scores, and what happened during the classroom. The Learning Management System, the LMS, was also used as well. Previous with Google Classroom, we would have a different platform, but then we use virtual meetings to help identify different issues and make sure that everyone was accessible to technology. We also use Schoology, which is another platform, an app that we have used to gain access to clarity with grades and using video platforms. We use Google Meet as well as Zoom as another platform. We've mainly gravitated towards Zoom as a school, but we had capabilities for everyone. We had a partnership during our distance learning day. It was very tough to make sure we had facilitation. However, we use Google Classroom as the primary source of information. We would show slides, we would show videos. To us, it was very user friendly and accessible. Everyone used that platform. And then we have PDF copies that were able to be zoomed in, and we could use comments in those areas. It was very nice. It was a very fluid and easy to use app. The Nearpad was, we had a partnership with another capability that was able to use for academic lessons and planning and so forth, and how to disseminate this with distance learning. We had a lot of challenges with some programs. We needed more training, more experience, more hands-on experience to understand the platform until we were able to use it more fluidly and more effectively. Obviously, there were some challenges with some apps, some devices and software platforms we don't use anymore. We've evolved, we've changed. In discussing math and ELA, students use a lot of platforms successfully. They were able to study their areas of need on this data-rich platform that we provided to them. And that's one of the pros that we would see from this, is we were able to associate with one another. We had community feedback. We had virtual labs that students could access. It took some time to learn, however, it was very successful. We had many different platforms for our students to use in gaining instructional support. Next slide. I want to discuss some of our highlights and successes, that what we have learned in our distance learning environment. Mainly it's a gain to more technology. Obviously, the in-person teaching is more preferred, but we are understanding distance learning is crucial. It's mainly understanding what families are using, and we will match their style. My personal opinion, we like Zoom. Some families prefer different platforms, but we're better aligned with one another ever than in the past. Mainly remote learning from school to school, from campus to campus. We are heavily involved a lot more than in the past pre-pandemic. And this is because our campuses are very much aligned. We do communicate with one another. If one IEP meeting works at one campus, then we would try to transition that to other campuses. We would make sure that every accessible meeting is proper. It seems that every family through this pandemic understands Zoom. And every time we get on, we have IEP meetings. It's a very fascinating program to use. We're very proud of it. We've also gained access to technology. We gave everyone more tutorials, videos, and discussing different platforms on how to do this and that and the other. And I'm very proud of that. One of the things that has best happened to us during this past school fiscal year between the two campuses is understanding through different meetings, different platforms, that sometimes campuses can collaborate and work more together and be better aligned with certain initiatives, mainly discussing student events, remote learning. Sometimes there's an hour drive between campuses. So instead of having an hour-long trip, we would have a Zoom conference or a Zoom meeting. I'm very thankful for Zoom and having that as a partner moving forward. This is very crucial for both campuses' success. Next slide. And then we'll discuss some challenges with this technology. Obviously, there were some. Google Meet is open source. And we had some struggle with technology in discussing this on how to make sure that we would spotlight certain people. Sometimes overlapping voices would change the video. So unfortunately, we had technology issues. Sometimes we would try to say, hey, stop speaking. It was funny, but we figured that Zoom was more user friendly and more customizable, so we can use it for our benefit as opposed to other platforms. Also, Zoom had better captioning, and you were able to access this from multiple platforms as opposed to just a computer or a desktop. Also would like to mention that multiple devices, when you log on to, let's just say Zoom, look different. They appear different. No matter what platform you use, the layout will be different. Unfortunately, we were trying to figure out a tutorial for every device. It was maybe sometimes a lot of work on our end, but we're able to show those tutorials on multiple devices. Also, some platforms weren't compatible. Mainly if you're on an iPhone, it was a very small screen. We tried to work with everyone and give them ideas on how to solve that issue. And some student challenges in discussing remote learning or some of these issues, access to technology. Sometimes there were outages, sometimes there were great connectivity, sometimes there were many resources, sometimes it was just a hard day for students and teachers and staff alike. I'm just very proud that we were all working together as opposed to struggling and working opposed to one another. But thank you for this time. Chet, thank you very much for that wonderful presentation. And this brings us to our next round of questioning and discussing data and how families can access data. Personally, I do agree with everything that has been said in discussing Zoom as a preferred platform. I wanted to introduce now another person. Let's just change this setting real quick. Milagros, I want to introduce her. And she's going to be discussing some of the needs and discussing family engagement and resources. Let me hand this off to her.
Thanks, Maber. Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I will present the various technologies solutions that MSD have implemented in the last several years to facilitate communication and the data sharing between the school and the families. Starting with our PowerSchool student information system, which is the main data solution that MSD uses for the record keeping and the data storage and reporting. PowerSchool student information system gives the family the opportunity to see and track attendance data, class schedules, current and historical grades, and the progress of graduation requirements for our high school students. In terms of statistics, for this school year, 96.3% of our students have at least one parent account with active access assigned to them in the PowerSchool student and parents portal. On that portal, parents have the option to set up either monthly, weekly, or daily notification emails to get status on their students' grades and attendance progress reports. Since the beginning of the school year, that 96.3% of the students that have parents account is represented by the 362 parents account that are active right now in the system, which means that we have several parents that have more than one student in the school, so they have more accounts, more student accounts linked to their parent account. For this school year, 258 records of students have been accessed through the website of PowerSchool. Another 145 students' records have been accessed through the mobile app. The mobile app, it's another also real accessible a communication tool that we use with our parents, since they can also set up push up notifications to their own mobile devices, so they know when attendance data or grades have been changed by the staff or teachers in the classrooms. Moving now to Schoology. Schoology is the learning management solution that MSD have implemented during the school year 2022-2023. That is a tool to help the teachers and the families to keep the communication open and to support the learning process of the students. At the beginning of this school year, we sent instructions and access codes to the parents so they can create their own accounts to access Schoology, and that way they can track grades, assignments, and information that the teachers put for the students there. So right now we have 90 accounts of parents that are linked to 111 students' profiles in Schoology. Another great solution that MSD have adopted in the last several years, it's Power School Enrollment. Power School Enrollment is a tool that we use in MSD to handle our registration process. So through Power School Enrollment, it acts like an add-on on the parents portal. So technically, parents are able to use it just under their own parent account that they already have in Power School portal. Next. So through the online registration, parents are able to update their contact information as phone numbers, home address, emergency contacts for the students, etc. They can update the medical information for the students, insurance information, first care providers, things like that, and also the health information, so such allergies, restrictions that the student have, or special considerations that they need to be addressed. They can also request bus transportation for the student. They can communicate the preferences regarding participation in athletic and after-school programs. They can request residential accommodation in our dorms facilities, and they can sign the agreements that are required at the beginning of every school year. A little bit of data also about the Power School Enrollment. Since the beginning of 2020-2021 school year that we have started using it, we have that over the years, we have had more than 75% of registration submitted through the Power School Enrollment, which really compares with the less than 50% that we were able to collect when we send the forms, the paper forms to the houses before the online registration. So that's a big accomplishment. Last but not least, MSD started using in the Frederick campus Pickup Patrol. This is a platform that we use to coordinate the dismissal plans for the student. And next year, Columbia campus is also planning to start using the app as well. So for this school year, we have already 182 parent accounts in Pickup Patrol, which represent 157 students on our Frederick campus. Those students are distributed by department as presented in the graph. We have 54% of the students in family ed. Parents already have Pickup Patrol's account, 72% in elementary department, 68% in the middle school, and 38% in the high school department. How we use it, that's the number of the average of daily plan changes that we have. it says that family ed and elementary department have an average 50% of daily dismissal changes, which are tracked and communicated through pickup patrol. So that is how helpful it is. In general, every and each one of these solutions are carefully managed in the school, and we keep updated the data in all of them, and we can guarantee that the data privacy and the security of our system, it's a priority for us, and it's the way that we can facilitate the access of the information and the smooth transition to technology for our families in the school. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Milagros, for that explanation of different ways that families can be
Thanks.
engaged and check on things like student grades. No questions at this time. So now I would like to introduce our Director of Public Relations, Amelia Mao. And she's going to talk a little bit about how we are using social media. Excuse me, I'm having a tech issue there. How MSD is utilizing social media to engage with our families. Amy?
Primero, Bella.
Okay, good afternoon. And aside from just social media, we're going to talk a little bit about the website and how we're engaging with our family in a variety of other capacities as well. So in 2018, the MSD purchased a new domain with our website. Okay. You notice we talked about PowerSchool, and one of the features that we have with our platforms is we have over 100 different languages that are an option. So we were able to construct a new website, but we did notice that there were resources and platforms that couldn't be supported there. So we utilize something called MailChimp. If we go on to the next slide, that'll talk a little bit about that. Perfect. So MailChimp has the capability to translate any content that's being disseminated to the MSD community. So as a deaf school, we have a lot of content that goes out in ASL. And in a regular email, you don't have really the capability to embed videos. And we needed that ability, not only for videos, but also pictures as well. Okay. And this is the email system we've decided to use. This came on board during the COVID pandemic because we recognize the importance and the critical need for communicating with our families and making sure that we're communicating in a language that our families can access and understand. So we utilize MailChimp for communicating out resources that families need in terms of where to find local food banks during the pandemic, technical support, so forth and so on. And this has been an integral system for that. Now, our purpose and our use of this has evolved over time. It has transitioned less to communicating about resources and more about communicating about events and things that pertain to the school. Next slide, please. This is our third academic year. Okay, we purchased MailChimp in 2020. So it wasn't an entire year, we bought it mid-year. So you can see a little bit of difference in the data breakdown in terms of what type of communication is happening. You'll notice now it's starting to be more balanced. Information from the superintendent's office, from the principal's offices, from O News, which is our weekly online newsletter, which gets sent out via email. Okay. That all of the school highlights are all disseminated via MailChimp. So you'll notice with the breakdown, the 2022-2023 year is a little bit more balanced since we're coming out of crisis mode, and our need to communicate is less COVID focused and more focused in the different areas you see highlighted here in different colors. Okay. You'll notice some of these numbers and the change in these numbers. The emails that we have been sending out this year is our highest open rate for our emails, meaning an individual who's receiving an email from the school via MailChimp in 2020, our opening rate was about 49%. Last year, it went up a little to 60%, and then this year we're at our highest ever at a 60% or a 70% opening rate, which means people are actually clicking and opening and reading those emails that are going out from the school. Ergo, they are more engaged. Now, there's a lot of different options for communicating via out. We have our teachers, we have our student life, principals, coaches, so forth and so on. You get a lot of emails over the course of the day and a lot of communications about different things, everything from classroom activities to school-wide events. It runs the gamut. And sometimes, those emails include things like student successes, highlights, so forth and so on. We also try to post that information on social media, so people can access the same information. If they're not social media participants or savvy with that, they can get the same information via emails. So our parents and families receive a lot of information from the school via email. Okay. We have it coming out from different channels, and we want to make sure that our messaging and our content is consistent throughout. Okay. Because we want to make sure that they remain engaged. And that's been the biggest challenge. Now we're trying to figure out who needs to be communicating out what information. And there will be a survey coming out this spring asking families really how they prefer to receive their communications. Now, emails are tried and true because they have been successful, but we're also going to be looking at other platforms. Other thing we've noticed when it comes to a challenge related to MailChimp is any mass notification, people can click on unsubscribe. And once they unsubscribe, they no longer receive any emails from the school unless we recognize that and add them back in. And that requires a request process. And it requires a new registration. So if they unsubscribe, they could miss mission critical information that pertains to the school. So that would be the biggest challenge that we've noticed. Now, prior to the pandemic, Maryland School had purchased another platform, One Call Now, and this was for the purposes of emergency notifications in the event of a school closure, something that needed to be communicated with immediately. That was something that parents subscribed to. They signed up to get text messages. All of the email addresses for all of our middle schoolers and high schooler parents, families, faculty were uploaded to this system. And you had to sign up to do a subscription for that text platform. And again, this was used in the event of inclement weather, things of that nature. We came to realize there was potential to expand and add additional features. So we want to use this as an opportunity to remind our families to make sure that they sign up for One Call Now. And now this is something that our families don't, it's something that they get not on a day-to-day basis, but something that they're able to access information via. So these are some of our current statistics. 833 texts, this goes via our subscription. And there's a code on our website with instructions for how families can sign up. Okay. We also have folks other than just families signing up. We have our bus drivers and other members of the MSD community subscribing to our text messaging push out service. Next slide. Now, which brings us to our social media engagement. We use 4 different platforms: Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter. These are the 4 that we utilize at MSD. Instagram has our most traffic, as well as Facebook. We're noticing a decline with our Twitter accounts. We still utilize it, but it gets less views. And then, of course, our YouTube is holding relatively steady. Next slide. Now, what does our reach look like when it comes to social media engagement? In the last 28 days alone, we've gotten 24,500 views on Facebook, so it's wide reaching. 19,000, okay, is our average. Now, Facebook is a great way for us to connect with alumni, our larger community. When it comes to our Instagram reach is very, very centralized with our immediate community. It's a little bit of a smaller number of followers, and it's mostly parents and students, but we see people interacting with Instagram on a day-to-day basis. Next slide, please. Okay, so platforms we are utilizing. We have Maryland Bulletin, which is our school newsletter. We offer it both in printed hard copy form as well as an electronic version. Our most recent issue went out to over 2,000 addresses. Okay, it goes to family, staff, and alumni. And in addition to that, we also send it out to all the school libraries here in the state of Maryland, all of the different School for the Deaf programs or programs with deaf and hard of hearing students throughout the United States. So our reach when it comes to the bulletin is far beyond the classroom. Okay, so we have emails, our website, our social media, and our publications as ways that we utilize and share the highlights of the successes going on at MSD.
There is a question. A couple of the other deaf schools have accounts, mainly for the middle school, for the high school, and so forth. But does Maryland have a one that recognizes the school and also the athletic department? Because I'm trying to understand more in scope as to how this will work.
So that's a fantastic question. As of right now, the quick answer would be no. And I don't necessarily think we're, oh, did I freeze? Hold on one second. Okay, everybody. Okay. All right. So as I was saying, as of right now, no, there's no plans to break things down in terms of department. I don't think we're necessarily behind because we have for K-12 and for a lot of legal liability reasons, okay, we have one account. And it's intended to highlight school successes versus communicating out very specific information. Okay. And we've noticed there are more challenge and more liability issues when it's broken down. That's just like departmentally versus having a school-wide account. So hopefully that answers your question. Okay, thank you so much. We are now going to introduce our elementary assistant principal for Frederick, Patty Germanson. And then for our Columbia Campus Middle School assistant principal, we'd also like to introduce Shannon Nagusi. And they're going to talk a little bit about how technology is being used to engage with families. Okay, we'll just wait real quick for Shannon to join us. Could we advance the slide deck, please? Okay, can we back up one? Thank you. Okay, so thank you for the introduction, member. We want to talk a little bit about how we connect with families via digital newsletters and what that looks like. We'll talk about some of the ideology of that, the contents of those newsletters, and the feedback we've received from families. Shannon? Thank you, Patty. We'll start from the beginning. My first year in the role of assistant principal for middle school was also the same year that the pandemic hit us and we shut down. During that time, of course, there was a lot of pivoting, shifting, safety procedures when it came to quarantining and masking and social distance. So when it came to distance learning, we really had a need to collaborate with our families, which meant the need for being open and transparent when it came to communication. We recognized that as being critical. So, of course, traditionally, we've always had email as an option. That being said, email has recognizable limitations. Formatting, design being two of them. And when you disseminate an email, it's very hard to track who actually opens it and reads it, what of the contents was or was not helpful, so forth and so on. So these were challenges that we identified. Our newsletter had historically been like a lifeline. That was what really helped us engage with our families. It kept them informed, it kept them involved about what their child was learning. Very true. So, Patty, you can share a little bit about the needs that came up when designing our newsletter. So one of the nice things about the newsletter is that there is a mobile component. So everything is visually accessible and user-friendly, designed to be used on an iPad or on a mobile device, so it didn't require, let's say, a laptop. We needed to make sure that there was video accessibility and a video component because this is a bilingual approach to education at MSD. Therefore, video and picture embedding is very important. Okay. We wanted to make sure that we could also track our engagement with our families. One of the other nice things is when you open the app, it has translation services to different languages. Okay, over 20% of our K-12 families are multilingual, so it's very nice to have that feature where they have the ability to translate the newsletter into a language that is accessible to them. I think it allows for over 100 languages. Am I right, Shannon? You are, which is a really, really nice feature. The other feature is that it has easy app integration. So you have the ability to embed other apps such as YouTube and a variety of other apps that we utilize, Padlet being one of them, which allows you to post comments and questions and really make it an interactive platform. It allows for open polling. It allows for the addition of Google Forms. It has a scheduling component so that people can book time during quote unquote office hours, be it virtual or in person, or coffee hours, or whatever the case may be. So very nice way to integrate everything within that one-stop app tool. We have the ability to track reader engagement to see if, for example, anything bounces back in terms of emails, to see what things people are clicking on, how much time they spend on a particular item, how much is the app being utilized on a mobile device versus on a desktop. Okay, we can go on to the next slide. Now, of course, as with anything, there were some challenges that we recognized with our newsletter. The first is the time commitment and consistency being key. We typically send out our newsletter Sunday nights or Mondays, and sometimes if a holiday falls on there, it makes that commitment a little bit difficult. So that has been a challenge. We also do it on a weekly basis because parents do have an expectation for that routine of having that newsletter be there in their mailbox, and also prioritizing the content, making sure that the content is always of high quality, that we're focusing on the highlights, and we're not overlooking any important information that needs to be included. So there's a fine balance between too much or too little information. And also, we mentioned email engagement. That still continued to be a challenge because at its essence, a newsletter is still an email. So some families we recognize prefer other methods of communication, such as texting or a phone call or an in-person meeting or Zoom. Okay. So this speaks a little bit to the contents of what's in our newsletter. Typically, we include expectations, what you should be expecting to see from your students, what parents can expect. Also, scheduling reminders if there's a school closure or a half day coming up. Anything else, Patty? Yes, if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to add. We also include tips, things to help families at home, reiterating the importance of attendance, and why it's important, reading challenges and ideas for how to mitigate those at home to improve that, weather, just reminders about appropriate dress in the case of weather so that our students remain warm, and then also information about any upcoming school events. There's the opportunity for photo sharing in the newsletter, and also the ability to really get into specifics about scheduling, like what time dismissal might be on a half day so that parents can expect that, and also any upcoming summer camps that might be happening and that might be available that they might not be aware of. We also will communicate out events about what's happening in the school, such as school plays. Also, it's a way to share out additional resources, information for how to read with your child at home, sharing diversity, sharing videos, ASL videos, activities you can do at home, social emotional learning, those SEL activities, information about mental health and supports there, and various digital polls that we engage our families with. Okay, last but not least, my favorite, and I think everybody could agree, that photo sharing, so important. The ability to share out student artwork, the ability to have parents see that, even if they can't come to school and see it in person, the ability to take pictures of what students are doing on a day-to-day basis so parents can really feel engaged and really know what students are doing. We spotlight special events such as award ceremonies and things of that nature, which is another nice way to elicit family engagement. Now, some testimonials we'll let you guys read. And this is so true. It's nice to have a one-stop shop for all that information, and then to be able to take that information you've learned to engage with your child at home and make those connections and talk about their day. The more parents have information about their day, the more they can engage with their child and ask them questions regarding those things. So another important piece is that collaboration, and not just with our parents and families, but with the whole community. Couldn't agree more. Absolutely. We will have a sample of our newsletter that you can read on your own. That'll be posted at the end of today's presentation, so you'll have the opportunity to see it in real time. Oh, there it is in the next, right there on the next slide. So this will be posted on our website so that you'll have the opportunity to read it at another time if you're curious to see what we share out on a department level with our families. So thank you so much for your time, and we will turn things back over to our wonderful ACs or MCs. All right, thank you so much for talking about how you engage with our digital newsletter. It looks like we do have one question. Were there any differences between the Frederick campus and the Columbia campus families when it comes to engagement? Does one campus have more versus the other? And if so, how does MSD plan to increase and kind of balance out that engagement between the two campuses, Frederick and Columbia? So really, it's three questions in one. You want me to repeat them? Okay, it says difference between the Frederick campus and the Columbia campus. I think I'll let Tara, I think Tara wants to speak to that. If Tara, do you want to come back up? All right, I'll wait till Tara addresses that question. But again, thank you guys both so much for your presentation and your time. Oh, there she is. Okay, so currently, we haven't yet broken down our data to that level of detail. That's going to be as part of our next steps. Okay. the way we collect things now, it doesn't allow us to filter from one campus to the other. What we're able to filter between campuses, we do, but that is not always an option depending on the platform. But that is definitely part of our action items for our next steps, is going a little bit beyond in terms of that breakdown of data. Of course, we are always looking in terms of how we can engage our entire set of families between both campuses. And that's certainly an area that is going to be a focus of our ongoing study. Right now, we're looking at things more holistically in terms of the entire campus, and we'll be breaking it down in our next steps. So thank you. Good question. All right, and thank you, Tara, for answering that question. All right, at this time, I would like to introduce our curriculum and instruction specialists. We have with us Miss Ann Beam, and we have Jenna Kuschmeider with us as well. Hello, everyone. Okay, could we advance the slide deck, please? Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about how we collected feedback from the community about our curriculum and our curriculum choices. So when we started searching for a new curriculum for all content areas, that included math, ELA, social studies, and the sciences, in the course of our research, we were able to narrow it down and find specific program and curriculum resources that met the Maryland state standards. Now, with those resources, we asked for physical samples of the books, the handouts, as well as digital access in the form of demo accounts. Once we had compiled all of those resources, we shared it out initially with our MSD staff, our teaching staff, and our employees here. That was our first phase. We brought all of those resources to both campuses, and we called it a curriculum fair. And the teachers and the staff had the opportunity to hands-on interact with the resources and with the demo curriculums to identify which one they felt would be best, using their expertise and their subject matter knowledge and their background of their particular discipline. Once we had narrowed it down based on that curriculum fair, then it became time to involve our larger community and families. Next slide, please. Okay. We felt during the process of involving our families and community, it was very important that we were transparent when it came to our curriculum selection. We wanted to communicate with our families that we wanted their collaboration in choosing the best curriculum to meet the needs of our students. Next slide. So the way we were able to do this, we looked at, of course, our challenges and some of the things we could leverage in the process. We have two campuses, as we mentioned, so that gives us a very large sample size in terms of getting feedback from. Again, as Tara mentioned, we serve 22 of the counties in Maryland, so that is rather wide-reaching, and we had to consider how we could reach out to everyone to make sure all families in the community throughout the state had the opportunity to give feedback. So that was an identified challenge. We also wanted to make sure that we kept health and safety into consideration because this was during the pandemic, so it was difficult to invite everybody in person to be in one location during that time. We discovered that Frederick County Public Schools was also in the process of looking for a new curriculum, specifically for math. We looked at their approach and how they engage with their families and found it to be very similar to our own. So we were able to utilize technology as part of that process. Next slide. So, two different avenues via technology that we use to engage our families. The first one was the aforementioned email. So in email, we explained our rationale and the fact that we had curated our choices down to a few different curriculum options and that we wanted our families and community involved in the process. We explained what the choices were, and we also attached PDFs that listed the way to access the demo accounts for all these different curriculums. So families could go in and interact at least superficially with the curriculum. Okay. We also had a PowerPoint presentation that we gave to the community talking about what types of features were included with said curriculum or program, for example, online features and what the benefits were. So all of that was laid out in a PDF format, and links were also provided in the body of that. After parents in the community had had the opportunity to interact with those different options, we utilized SurveyMonkey the same way we have used it to collect our data from staff in terms of their feedback. We use the same approach to collect feedback from our families and our community. We asked for things like ease of access, so forth and so on, and the results of which are on the next slide. So we were able to compile responses from 38 families, and their feedback influenced, as well as the staff feedback, influenced our selection of curriculum. We combined the two of those to help inform our choices of curriculum that we implemented this past fall. We did want more family engagement. We felt that at the time, technology was still very new in terms of how it was being leveraged, being the beginning of the pandemic. I think now people are more used to it and a little more familiar, and I certainly think that they would be more engaged with the use of the platform. And that's how we utilize technology for communicating with our families and our staff in order to get their feedback about curriculum. Hello, hello. So it doesn't look like we have any questions. So thank you both for speaking a little bit to curriculum, and thank you for your time today as well. All right, I'd like to take this time to introduce our two family ed principals, Tara Dubowski-Finkel from our Frederick campus, and Patty Muldowney, our principal of family ed on our Columbia campus. So welcome to the two of you. Oh, 1 second. Mumper, do you want to go back a slide or? Okay, could we ask Jenna and Anne to come back quickly? We have a question from our audience. Jenna and Anne, could you come back up, please? Actually, 1 second, Anne. Looks like Tara's going to take care of answering that question. So. Okay. So I will go back to both Patty and Tara. Sorry for the interruption, folks. And we will turn things over to them for their presentation about family ed. All right, could we advance the slide deck, please? Good afternoon, everyone. Okay, so we're going to talk specifically about family ed services. Prior to our action research project, let's talk a little bit about what that looked like. All of our services were provided to children and families in person. Okay, and what those services involved were classes and playgroups, home visits, and parent support via ASL classes and what we call our parent group. Now, all of these, again, were provided in person only at that time. Next slide, please. Okay. Again, this is pre-pandemic. Everything was in person at that time. And we were actively looking for different ways to use technology to engage our family. It's difficult because these are our youngest learners and how they access technology is very different. And then when COVID happened and everything pivoted to a virtual environment, we had to still provide all of our services virtually. And we did that through the Zoom platform and through Google as well. Now, our services are heavily dependent on home visits. That's a huge component. when our staff and our teachers go into the family home to provide direct services related to language acquisition, modeling, for example, how to tell a story in sign language, or talking about specific vocabulary that's pertinent to that family. Now, when we transitioned to a virtual online model, we had to do in kind with our home visits. We also have variety of meetings, IEPs and IFSPs. IEPs are for our students 3 and above. It's an individual education plan. And IFSP is for our birth to 2 population, individual family support plan, where we work on family specific goals and outcomes. All of these things had to transition virtual. And we were able to do that with some challenges, of course. Again, these are our youngest learners. So some of the challenges were related to families still learning sign language and utilizing things like the chat when communicating online with our staff. Today, we are back to in-person. And in person, we have seen that there have been a lot of benefits. And Patty, can you share some of those? I mean, obviously, if you can only imagine these being our youngest learners, trying to engage them via a screen and teach them via a screen and expose them to language just has inherent challenges. So one of the benefits of in-person is that direct opportunity to coach and to consult and to provide that direct access to students. Some of the additional benefits for virtual are home visits, which we continue to do. We provide an option now for home visits, in person and or virtual. And the reason being is that we do have some families, okay, that virtual just works with their schedules better. And we're able to meet with them in order to still teach the language via a virtual home visit where they might not be available in person. In addition to that, for our youngest learners who are medically fragile, sometimes their families elect to do virtual home visits just for the purposes of safety. Next, please. Next slide. Okay, we also provide family support groups 2 different ways. The first is the ASL classes that we offer, as well as our parent support group. These were in person, okay, pre-COVID. We met weekly for both of these on a variety of different topics. During COVID, everything transitioned to virtual, and our ASL classes and parent support groups did in kind. Now that we are back to in-person, we did notice that for our ASL classes in specifically, attendance went up virtually, and that's probably due to scheduling concerns. So we noticed higher parental involvement virtual because there was more flexibility in terms of the scheduling. So when we went back to in-person, we decided to provide options. You can either take an ASL class now virtually or in person to maintain that level of engagement. For our parent support groups, we do have our parent support group on campus. In addition to that, we have the option of joining virtually for a parent who might not be able to attend in person, okay, so that they can participate in the discussion. So we rotate and provide those different options so that all parents have the opportunity to be engaged. Next slide, please. Okay, so ongoing communication with families, what does that look like? We utilize a variety of different apps and web-based programs to share and disseminate information with our families about what's going on in the classroom and to celebrate those students and classes' achievements. And the reason we use different programs is because each program has a different purpose behind it and meets a different need that we might have. All of these encourage family engagement and collaboration and involvement with online learning activities built in. Padlet, as previously mentioned, Shannon and Patty already mentioned that as one of our options. Teachers have the ability to organize materials and resources and videos and vocabulary for families and curate that in one place, which makes it a lot easier for our families to look and find the information that they may be looking for. For our ASL classes, they have their own Padlet with weekly videos and slides and stories in ASL and the vocabulary that they're covering. It's also used for our individual classes. Sometimes, for example, it might be used for home visits as well. It's another option. It's very versatile. One family might have a very specific need and they want vocabulary as it relates to that content or topic that pertains to their family, or social stories related to that content. So the teachers can find and curate those resources and put it all in one place on that collaborative web platform, which is nice. Seesaw we also use, and that's specifically for classroom activities, to share information, to post pictures, to really give parents the opportunity to see what's happening in the classroom, as well as activities that they can then do at home. Parent teachers can immediately communicate through the Seesaw app as well, which is nice for real-time engagement. And Patty and Shannon also mentioned S'mores. Okay, Family Ed uses that as well. That's the digital platform that our newsletter is built on. Very family friendly, and it makes it very easy for families to be able to see information laid out in a very organized way. Another app that we use occasionally is called Talking Points, and that's for communicating with our families, particularly if that family needs translation to another language. So all of these have the overarching goal of family engagement. And we're very thrilled with the engagement we've seen thus far utilizing these different applications. Next slide, please. Okay, so resources for our families. We are always looking for different resources as well as developing our own. Things like sign stories, particularly with books online. We're utilizing that technology to incorporate sign language overlay with that. We've also developed different videos with vocabulary for our younger learners with different words they need to know. In addition to that, using a book as an example, for our youngest learners, captions are not always an option because they're not yet reading. So we want to make sure that we have ASL overlay so that they can access those stories. We develop some videos with that as well as videos with captions. And then we make existing videos that are out there accessible to our families and children as well via the same methods. And we also have a variety of different teaching topics that could be on literacy, it could be on this resources and materials that we have for our youngest learners, like the iPad, how to engage them with that, how to utilize Spotlight via that. We want to make sure that our families know how to use that, okay, because we have birth through 5 in our program. And there's a lot of support that we provide in navigating those different pieces of technology. Okay, also for our families in their home, we use different types of we provide different types of performances via the Zoom platform so that our parents can see their students in real time, dressed up. They can see them perform even if they can't participate in person. And that's a real nice, how do I say, way to foster those connections, which are so important for our families and so important for language development. And we continue to build on our resource library. Also, we've developed different resources that we share, and parents have found and shared with us resources that they've seen at other schools. So it's so nice to have that collaborative effort and a great way to connect via technology. The world is kind of at your fingertips now, and that information sharing of resources in an accessible way to foster language acquisition for all of our students and support our families, as well as their caretakers, is what we've been focused on. Thank you. Next slide. All right, thank you so much, Tara and Patty, for that presentation. It looks like there's a question for the both of you. Okay, with the technology piece added to MSD, okay, are we seeing more families staying with the program? What is the retention rate for Family Ed to elementary when they transition into elementary school? Are we seeing better retention at one particular campus versus the other? I actually think that's a fantastic question. I don't know if we have the data to compare retention rates of that transition from family ed to elementary pre and post our use of technology, but that's certainly something we can look into further. Tara, I don't know if you want to add. Nope. Thank you so much. Nope, nothing to add. Thank you so much. All right, fantastic. Thank you both so much. Now, I'd like to introduce our next speaker, who is our ASL teacher, Miss Debbie Myers. If she'd like to come on up. Thank you so much for being here. Okay, before I begin, I think everybody needs to take a minute to just stand up and stretch. We've had a lot of wonderful presentations. I don't know where I fall in the count, maybe 9th or 10th. So let's take a moment, everybody, and stretch, get that blood flowing so we're ready to continue. So I'm going to be talking about our ASL class offerings for our MSD families. Okay. So when a child is identified within a family, oftentimes families don't know anything about ASL as a language. They typically haven't met another deaf person before. So we recognized as a school the need to provide ASL classes as a resource for our families. That's a responsibility for us to provide that support to them and to reach out to them in real time. And you can see the statistic there of how many of our families fall into that category. ASL classes are vital. It is fully accessible in terms of a language. Okay. It is a basic need, just as any other need for a baby: touch, being fed, being changed, being cared for. They need that language as well. And their communication needs increase as they grow. And that's where the need to learn ASL for the family becomes critical. When families engage and learn ASL, it strengthens the relationship between the caregiver and the child. Deaf children who have access at home means that they can fully participate in the home environment. That means the child knows everything that's happening in the home. They're able to learn the family's heritage, history, and background. The child can contribute ideas autonomously. They can share their feelings. They can feel confident that they are understood as a member of the family. Nope. Can we go back one slide? Okay, thank you. Within the state of Maryland, there are 180 days of school that are required. Now, imagine a deaf child going to school, never missing a day. That puts them in the school environment for 180 days. What about the other 185 days? Where are they? They're, of course, at home, meaning they're spending the majority of their time at home versus in an academic environment over the course of a year. And therefore, access to American Sign Language in that home environment has a huge impact on that child's development. So we want to provide a foundation for that child's learning for the rest of their academic career. And we do that by supporting the parents. So at MSD, we offer ASL classes, levels 1, 2, and 3. In addition, we offer something called conversational ASL. That's for our more advanced students. And we also offer something called hand shapes. For example, we pick a hand shape like this, and you focus on that particular hand shape, that particular parameter, and all the signs that can be created with that. Our classes run 15 weeks. We offer them in the fall and in the spring. They typically begin in September and run through January, and then in the spring run from February until the month of June. Pre-COVID, our only option was in-person ASL classes. Post-COVID, we now offer both an online and an in-person option. With our virtual classes, one of the nice things is that scheduling-wise, it offers us a lot more flexibility. We can host a class from 8 in the morning until 7 or 8 o'clock at night. Now, if you compare enrollment pre and post pandemic, we've seen a marked increase of about 160% in terms of enrollment in our ASL classes once we started offering that virtual option. Pre-COVID, our classes, like I mentioned, were in person, and class size was relatively small. The folks who could attend were primarily parents or guardians, some siblings occasionally. With our virtual class offerings, when we began that, we saw the numbers increase and we saw more extended family members signing up. So folks like grandparents or aunts and uncles or cousins or nieces and nephews were all able to participate. Now, the size is sometimes difficult to manage. They are rather large. ASL 1 in particular, we see our largest class sizes. And the challenge that comes along with the virtual classes is multi-part. There's a high rate of dropout. And that takes place for a variety of reasons. Some people find that learning through an online medium is difficult. Okay. Also, there might be a family member that misses because of illness or because of things come up or things that come up and they find it difficult to catch up later on. Speaking specifically to our ASL 1 class, which has had a huge increase in enrollment, okay, 2019, which was pre-COVID, we offered 4 ASL 1 sections with roughly about 20 individuals in attendance. Post-COVID, with our virtual offerings, we saw those numbers go up to 97 people signing up for the ASL 1 class alone. So from 20 up to 97, so that's a huge increase. Next slide. Some additional statistics. So this shows data from the fall of 2019, and this is specifically for our Frederick campus. Our Columbia campus did not have their data ready, so we see 5 people or 5 classes in person only, 15 to 20 folks for a total of maybe 50. If we look at fall of 2020, when our virtual options happened, and our only virtual options at that point, of course, we saw 121 participants, folks registered for class. Then, if you look at fall of 2021, you saw another huge amount of gain, 171 up from 121. And we also wanted to provide access for our 30 Spanish-speaking families. So I was able to translate all of my materials and slides into Spanish to make sure we were serving those families as well. And we offered 2 classes specifically for our Spanish-speaking families. And we had 24 folks register for that. However, there were some challenges with that. We didn't realize at the time that many of those families struggled with access to technologies like laptops, and a lot of them were trying to use their phone to access the ASL classes, and that's not really ideal for being able to see myself signing as the model and the PowerPoint presentation at the same time. So it's been an interesting learning experience with that demographic specifically. We meet via Zoom, and for example, I tried to reach out to all of the families individually, and only one family showed up, and they had a Spanish-speaking interpreter with them. So we need to do more outreach specifically to that demographic and support them because they struggle with that technological access. Then if we look at fall of 22, we see the numbers go down because I think that there were families who felt that online learning was not the best fit for them. And some folks still struggle with access to the technology, so that becomes an issue. An iPad or a phone are not the most ideal way to interact with that content. Now, pros and cons. So I've already kind of started speaking to this, and this is based on my perspective in my experience with the online classes. I've had the privilege of meeting so many families through my teaching. And to be honest, they connect with us through all over the United States, Michigan, California, Florida to New York. We have extended family from all over participating. Because it's on Zoom, they can see me and they're able to see that transition and that bilingual instruction. I can utilize the chat for English. And then of course I'm signing in ASL. So these are all wonderful, wonderful benefits of the online platform. Now, the cons or the challenges. Limited interaction is a real thing. Nobody is in the same room together. I typically utilize 2 screens so that I can see everybody at the same time in a gallery format, but for some of our families, their view varies from family to family and technology to technology and device to device. Now, I have 11 family members who are currently in the class. All of them have experience with both in-person classes and virtual. And I wanted to get some of their feedback. Okay, and their pros pretty much aligned with the pros that I mentioned earlier, the flexibility and the convenience, and the fact that they can do it from home. They're more comfortable, for example. It doesn't interfere with their daily routine or schedule, and there's no need for transportation involved. Several folks are able to access the classes during their lunch hour at work even. Now, family feedback in terms of the challenges, it's sometimes difficult to follow who is talking. We might have 15 to 20 people participating in a class. And if you are looking at everybody in gallery view as well as the slides, sometimes you can't see all the students. And if somebody asks me a question and I'm responding to it, somebody else might not have seen that question being asked, for example. So limited ability to engage with everybody in the class simultaneously. My camera also is set up like it is here, okay? And for some folks, if I'm trying to teach specific vocabulary like clothing such as pants or a skirt, I have to adjust my camera or I have to stand. So you're not getting the entire experience because camera gives you a limited amount of lens real estate. Now, segueing to the in-person classes, talking a little bit about the pros and cons of both. For the in-person, some of the wonderful things, some of the benefits are the social interaction in real time, the ability to have a relationship and rapport that you don't get in a virtual environment, okay? As well as those fostering those family relationships, which is nice. The ability to give immediate feedback and correct signs in real time on the spot right there before it becomes bad habits. Parents are enculturated into deaf culture more naturally, for example, sitting in a horseshoe shape so everybody can see each other, and the ability to get people's attention in a more organic, natural way and have them copy what I'm showing them. Now, challenges with in-person. There are many families who bring their children to my classes, and I encourage them to do so. That being said, my classroom is not designed for young students, and my lessons are specifically for adults, okay? They are not aligned with what children may be learning or engaging, particularly for children. I always have an interpreter the first night of ASL class, just to talk about the logistics and expectations. That being said, for the remainder of the series, questions sometimes come up, and those questions sometimes require or deserve a more in-depth response. And because there's no interpreter, that is sometimes impeded. Now, when it's online, I can bring in an interpreter via technology very quickly to get those questions answered. Next slide. So, feedback from our families in terms of what their perspective on the in-person classes is. Very much aligns to what I previously mentioned, the instantaneous feedback, the interacting with peers, being in an authentic setting, the ability to have those conversations in one space. And some folks find it's difficult, to develop that rapport. That being said, the cons are geographically, it's hard for some folks to come in person. It doesn't always align with their schedules, and it's a challenge, partially because of geography, for those extended family members to participate. So you can see that offering ASL classes to foster language is important for engagement within our community. Thank you so much, Debbie. Appreciate your presentation focusing specifically on our ASL class offerings. With today's technology and all the changes, it's definitely more accessible to our families so that they can learn ASL and provide it for their children. So thank you so much. All right, at this time, I would like to welcome our director of our Enhanced Services Program, and also the coordinator for our Extended School Year, or ESY program, Ms. Caitlin Blake. Hello. So thrilled to be here with everybody today to give a presentation and talk specifically about our parent training series that we provided last May of 2022. Next slide, please. All right, so purpose of providing this 4-part parent series. So we wanted to engage and collaborate with families for a specific group of our learners within our elementary age group. We had 2 thoughts while we were setting up this training. Okay. First of all, we had the accreditation, reaching out to families through technology use, which we wanted to satisfy. In addition to that, we also had goals under one of the grants that we have, and this grant is entitled Access, Equity, and Progress. So the Access, Equity, and Progress grant that we have, which falls under the Maryland State Department of Education, gave us funding to help support our students within this particular cohort or group of students that we were looking at. And the goals were what strategies and tools that we're using in school with our students, how can we apply these at home and train and support our parents to be able to use the same tools and the same strategies so that we have a more aligned approach between home and school. So there were a lot of talks about what to do in terms of how to provide that, and we came up with 2 options. The first would be to provide a pre-recorded training video or a series of videos for parents and families that they could watch on their own at their own time and their own pace and take that training when it was convenient for them. And in addition to that, we had a secondary option of coming together as a group to do feedback and collaboration. So having the families come together. So we provided over the course of this series different strategies and tools that families could use to support the growth of their students for success, both with academics, with language, as well as behavior. And we did that via the synchronous and asynchronous approach. We were able, through our grant funding, to purchase some materials to send to our families. It was sent to their home, and it was included as part of our training in the form of a kit. So it was a variety of resources that was sent to them to give you an examples of what might have been included in the kit. We bought whiteboards with stands that went along with them, expo markers, those dry erase markers, little magnetic letters and numbers, visual timers, pictures with the sign that went along with them. So a variety of different things that we typically have in our classroom that now they could have in kind at home as well. Next slide. So our 4-part series was broken into 4 topics. The first topic that we focused on was language and behavior. The second one was called math in everyday life. Our third was visual supports. And then our 4th was designed around reading strategies. And we can go on to the next slide. Now, our trainers, there were 3 of us who worked collaboratively as a team. We had our special education coordinator, who also is a deaf educator. They were responsible for the development and the training as it related to the math and reading strategies. Then myself as the second trainer, the director of Enhanced Services program at MSD. In addition to that, I also do behavior analysis. So I developed the training as it related to language and behavior. And then our third trainer was one of our speech and language therapists, or SLPs, and their focus was on content related to functional communication and those visual supports, as I mentioned. So she developed that presentation. So we utilized a variety of technology in the development of this training series. First and foremost, we had to develop our presentations to make sure that they were smooth and aligned. As I mentioned before, they were pre-recorded, and we did that via Zoom. We asked that our families who are participating in this program watch one video per week for a total of 4 weeks. And the conclusion of watching that video, we then offered a synchronous meeting. Again, that was also done on a weekly basis to do a deeper dive and have a conversation about the video that they watched. So it was very nice to have those options. You could watch the video at your own time when you were free and when it was easier for you. We also wanted to make sure that the videos themselves were short enough. Many families are very busy and attention is limited, and they have a variety of different responsibilities and things pulling at them. So we limited our video length to approximately 15 to 30 minutes. And we felt that would be a reasonable ask of our parents if we were asking them to watch one video weekly. As I mentioned, we set up a scheduled 1-hour meeting time, and it was up to the parents as to whether or not they wanted to participate in that and engage with each other. It was an opportunity for brainstorming of ideas, talking about what worked or what didn't work in your home, what other things you might apply, what's working in school, and what might need to be adjusted. We used Google Forms to gather feedback from our families and evaluations on the series. Our goal, of course, is always to improve for our next group of parents. So we asked our families to fill out that form after each weekly session. And all of the information was incorporated in one of those before mentioned Padlets. You've seen that word several times already, so we heavily utilized that. And that included pictures. There's actually a picture of our Padlet on the next slide. If we want to jump ahead, there it is. So you see each one of these columns. So essentially each one of these is kind of a bulletin board, and that's for each training session. So we include the pre-recorded training there. In addition to that, the PowerPoint. In addition to that, we also post the evaluation form for the families to access, and then the Zoom link. So everything is right there on one Padlet, and parents have one link that they can click on to access all 4 weeks. So very nice, friendly feature. In addition to that, we also, as I mentioned, utilize Zoom for our synchronous meetings and Google Slides to develop those presentations and PowerPoints. We posted our trainings in YouTube as well, and that certainly helped us to collect data in terms of engagement and how many views the video had received. So that was another nice option. Next slide, please. So what lessons did we learn from this experience? So first, we recognized that we had more people who engaged with the video than who showed up for the in-person synchronous discussion. I feel like we were able to connect with more families via the video, but so that was a wider reach of our audience than the in-person. For our next cohort, remember, we had these on a weekly basis, so all 4 parts of the series were done within a month. We were thinking next time, maybe do them quarterly and spread them out a little bit, might encourage more participation. Now, of course, we have the pre-recorded videos at the ready, which is going to be helpful because when we have a new anytime we have new parents join MSD, they're able to utilize that as a resource as well. Also, anytime we onboard new staff or teachers, we utilize those pre-recordings as a resource. So that is going to be an evergreen piece of technology that we can use. 2 quotes, testimonials from parents who participated in our first cohort series last year. The fact that we incorporated vocabulary from the IEP process into the trainings, they seem to appreciate. And feedback from another parent stating that the slides being included was beneficial because it allowed them to take the time to really look over the information more carefully. And I think that concludes my presentation. I'll turn things back over to our MCs. Thank you so much, Caitlin, for the presentation. It's really great that you have those pre-recorded series for all the parents, especially those folks who are new to MSD. I don't see any questions, so thank you so much. Okay, now I would like to introduce our Director of Student Support, Ms. Charlene Ward-Marr. The floor is yours. Well, welcome again. We press on. So really, I want to speak a little bit to our successes and our challenges, specifically as it relates to our individual education plan or IEP process, and do some comparisons about pre and post pandemic and steps moving forward. So first and foremost, as we've mentioned before, we serve students throughout the state, okay, 22 counties, including Baltimore cities. So from one end of the state to the other is the families that we need to engage in. And with that in mind, okay, we recognize we need options available for our families. So let's start with pre-COVID. We have an IEP meeting room designated on both campuses, a designated space. And we actually have those rooms in several buildings for the purposes of scheduling, so we can schedule multiple IEPs at the same time if needed. We have over 400 or 500 students at any time, and only 180 days, as was mentioned, of the school academic year that we have to conduct those IEPs in. Students have to have a minimum of one IEP meeting annually. And for a variety of reasons, many students will have 2 to 3 meetings on an annual basis. So if you do the math there, over 400 students times the possibility of multiple meetings, all of that fitting into 180 days, there's a need for creativity when it comes to scheduling. Pre-COVID, our options were in-person meetings or participation via conference call or video phone, meaning that we could connect to via video phone and kind of move the camera around within the room for those particular families. So it would be like almost as if the family was there participating. In addition, we also have the option called permission to proceed. So if the family member cannot attend in person or be involved via phone conference or video phone conference, they could elect to give the team permission to go ahead without their involvement if they weren't available to join. And then we could proceed with the meeting without the parent. Next slide. Now, of course, there are strengths and weaknesses with any approach. When it comes to the in-person pre-COVID approach, the strengths were when the families were able to participate and come to campus, it allowed them to have a more immersive opportunity with the process and for them to see and interact in real time with the staff that's working with their particular child and to engage with the culture and the language in a more organic and authentic way. And really, that was the biggest benefit for our families in person. They also had the opportunity to participate with a larger group of people in a room, a larger team, depending on the needs of the child. Now, that there were challenges that's been mentioned several times over the course of the day. Distance for our families to be able to come and participate in an in-person meeting was certainly a challenge. Some families had to drive sometimes 3 hours one way just to participate in an IEB meeting, which is difficult. That takes up their entire day if they're not able to stay somewhere close to campus. Scheduling conflicts. Some families, we have families where folks are working multiple jobs and it's difficult for them to take time off just to participate in one meeting. Also, language barrier. That was a real issue. Sometimes a student, or a family wants to express challenges. Sometimes they're hesitant or intimidated to do that when they're in a meeting where they feel that they can't fully participate with or without the availability of an interpreter. They just feel disconnected from the language and the process, therefore. Some families do bring with them some negative experience. It might have been their own negative experience, and that, of course, colors their involvement with their child during the IEP meeting and during that process. We have always had some challenges with creating a balance. No matter how we design our seating and our layout for the families, there is always going to be more staff than family members within any given IEP meeting. So there's never a perfect balance. It's always heavier on the side of school staff, and that can be intimidating for families as well. Now, the phone conferencing option, not ideal, does have its strengths and weaknesses. Again, participation via phone conference allows us to proceed with meetings with parental involvement, even if they can't be there in person, and maintain our schedule. Okay, we don't have to reschedule meetings, for example, or reschedule less often. We try to limit the amount of time, so we do that. Also, it misses that engagement. You can't make eye contact with the family if they're on the phone, of course. And the lag time that's needed for communication via an interpreter is difficult on the phone. Some family conferences go very, very long because of some of those challenges, and that's difficult for families. Typically, you will get very short, truncated answers as responses. So that really isn't the ideal form of participation. I don't think that parents really feel engaged. I don't think that they feel like they can really truly participate via the phone. In addition to that, there's still a very large team involved, okay? And the availability of interpreters for language needs is still also an issue. Like I mentioned before, developing that rapport is difficult. Developing that connection is not always possible. Depending on where they live, cell service can be an issue, so technology can be a problem. And not having that parent in the room, there's definitely a sense of imbalance where things being more heavily weighed in terms of school personnel than parent input. Next slide. Now, this leads us to the pandemic. And as has been echoed by everybody else, we had to pivot very quickly to a fully virtual environment, which means that we had to continue to provide IEP meetings virtually. And we were in real time making that shift and figuring out what that would look like. We were tasked with finding the most appropriate, how do I say, platform, I guess, for this. And of course, everybody has a preference. Some folks, Zoom is the gold standard. However, the state of Maryland let us know that there were some safety concerns in terms of FERPA and protecting private information for the families and the students. Everything, of course, we discussed during the IEP meeting is bound by FERPA. So that led us to, because these students are considered disabled, even though sometimes their coding is simply deaf for instruction, other students have multiple needs and sometimes very complicated needs. So all of this involves private, privileged information. And we couldn't risk any possibility of there being a breach of security in that conversation, be it in person or virtual. So early on, Zoom did not provide the necessary safety features to ensure that confidentiality. There were some issues where people could Zoom bomb. You might have heard of that in meetings. So we used Google Meets in the beginnings of the pandemic to host IEP meetings because it did have those safety features. And we're going to touch more on those challenges. So we continued fully virtual with meetings. The second year when we came back and reopened, we tried to create a balance of options for our families. And if we go on to the next slide, we can elaborate more on that. So over the course of the pandemic, we recognized several challenges as well as several positives that came out of virtual meetings. And I'm really just echoing the messages we've heard throughout the day. The biggest positive is that we saw a significant increase in family participation and involvement, not just in the content, but the reduction of cancellations for meetings was amazing. Parents had the ability to stay where they were. They didn't have to cancel anything from work or other appointments or other scheduling conflicts. They had the ability to briefly stop, join the meeting and then go back and pick up immediately where they left off in their day-to-day without having to take time off and drive great distances. So that significant increase in participation was the first positive we noticed. The availability of interpreters continued. There wasn't a big shift there. We were able to transition that to virtual meetings. We also saw an increase when it came to the balance of the meeting dynamic and the complement of the meeting, because we needed to find ways to reduce the numbers of people participating to save screen real estate. Too many people on a screen at once becomes very difficult to manage visually or for the purposes of conducting or facilitating a meeting. So we worked hard to reduce those numbers to just what was necessarily for the implementation of the IEP and still create a meaningful meeting. And that allowed for a better balance in terms of the complement between family participants and school participants. It definitely felt more equal during this time. We also saw an increased opportunity for scheduling. More people could facilitate meetings simultaneously because there wasn't a need to reserve a specific space. Okay. So we were able to host more meetings at the same time. It was certainly a learning curve. That was probably the biggest challenge. Okay, so we were working with the state and following as they developed their SOPs. We would have to practice it first and then disseminate it to our families and to our school staff. Visual fatigue was real for both our staff and our families. Next slide. So those were some of the challenges. All right, so you see our timeline. Our first year back, we continued with fully virtual IEPs because we were still operating with limited space on both campuses. Classrooms were being utilized for things like mobile infirmaries, so we continued to operate virtually, and we found still a lot of success in that way when it came to scheduling and participation from the families. Our feedback from families and from the community has been very positive, and they've elected to keep it now into the second year. We provide balanced options. Parents can elect at this time to have an in-person meeting versus a virtual one. Next slide. So, and based on that election, the data shows that we still have 80% or more of our families electing to participate in IEPs via virtual. Next slide. So what does this mean in terms of outcomes of this process? Well, they're listed here. Really and truly, families are expressing that they feel more involved. There's that better balance within the meeting dynamic. We're seeing less cancellations. And we're seeing less requests to move or reschedule meetings. We've also seen significant improvement for the staff in terms of productivity, less time outside of the classroom to engage in these meetings. So ultimately, it's a win-win. Okay, and that concludes my presentation. Thank you so much, Charlene. Appreciate that amazing information. I'm sure people have been very curious to learn that. Thank you so much. Now, I would like to introduce our assessment and data coordinator, who is going to talk a little bit about all of this information and our action plan, what we are doing between our benchmarks and our mid-cycle. So let me introduce Miss Jessica Willoughby. The floor is yours. Okay, so we're going to speak about two different data collection reports to get us started. First of all, I'm going to start off by talking about our benchmarks, and then we're going to talk about our mid-cycle. Next slide. So our benchmark survey was done with our students, our families, and our staff, and that took place in 2018. Okay. And then we did it in the winter of 2023. We used SurveyMonkey for both of those instances, our benchmark and our mid-cycle, and we were able to collect a wealth of data. Okay. people having the chance to type responses, so qualitative data in that case, as well as quantitative data, more of those numbers and statistics and actual metrics. So families and staff had the opportunity, for example, to rate a response 0 to 8 or 9, or the opportunity to answer a yes or no question, or to answer via a multiple choice modality. Next slide. Now, before we do a deeper dive in terms of the results and the outcomes, there's two things I want everybody to keep in mind as we talk about this, because it will color our results. The first is when it comes to our benchmark survey that we sent out in 2018, it was only available at that time in English and ASL. Just recently for our mid-cycle, we were able to include a Spanish translation as well, making it more accessible to more of our families and leading to more family participation in the answering of that survey. The second, we have had a change in our demographic. In 2018 to 2023, our student population has changed. We've had a lot of graduates, 4 classes so far. So we're seeing a different group of students being the focus of the survey versus 4 years ago, leading to a little bit of a difference in responses. So first and foremost, I want to focus on the students' responses to the survey. The focus was specifically about getting the responses to students' perspective on their family's ability to help them with schoolwork at home. How much support did they feel they were receiving? And did they feel that their families could adequately serve as language models for them? So those were the two key things we were looking to find out. Next slide. Okay. I'm not going to bore you with all the graphs and all the data. We have a myriad, over 30 graphs for each question. They will be online. I'm just going to talk briefly about the results now, but they would be available on the website if you'd like to do a deeper dive. So for our student survey, again, we collected those responses focusing on those 2 key questions, okay? And we broke them down into 6 questions. 2 out of those 6, we noticed a decrease, okay, between 2018 and 2023. And those were, how well do families communicate with their students in ASL? And in what ways and what areas could families provide support to their students? So when we compared the results between 2018 and this current year, we saw a decrease in the responses. Also, our mid-cycle winter survey that was sent out, we noticed more students were checking always and never. Okay, their responses were more of never. Some of the questions allowed the students, as I mentioned, to check other or type in a qualitative response. And we noticed that students were using certain words often: none, or depends, or discuss. Okay, so I want to shift over to our family survey now. We surveyed our family with a total of 12 questions. The focus being really we wanted to glean the answers to the following questions we had. The family's ability to, very similar to the student survey, help children with their homework. How confident did families feel in talking about a variety of different topics, particularly sensitive topics, with their student? Did the family feel that they could be adequate language models to their student? Do they feel a connection with the school? And how often do they receive communications from the staff in the school? So those were our primary areas of focus with regards to our family survey. Next slide. Okay. Again, that was in the form of 12 questions. Out of the 12, we noticed a decrease from 2018 to 2023 for several questions in particular. The question about being able to help a student with homework and projects, and the ability to talk about difficult issues, and the ability to engage at home. We noticed more families were struggling to provide that support with their child at home. They struggled to have conversations about those issues, and they struggled to be engaged with technology or access to internet specifically. And the scores from 2018 to 2023 were also low when it came to being able to connect with other families. We saw that as an issue. And ASL competency from 18 to 2023 didn't change much either. Now, from 2018 to 2023, we did notice a pattern when it came to some of the comments from families. When they typed in under that other box, Okay, they definitely focused on the need for more ASL, and that's something that we are addressing and working on. Next slide. So again, we surveyed our students, our families, and then also our staff. So when it came to the staff survey, that included the entire MSD community, teachers, staff, both campuses. We broke down our questions into two specific categories, specific questions for our educators, and then specific questions for our student life or dorm staff, and then also some specific questions for our support services, with a total of approximately 21 questions between those three categories. Our focus was twofold. How much contact were our staff having with families, and who initiates that contact? Is it the school reaching out or vice versa? So those were the goals in terms of what we were looking to see. Next slide. So the results of our staff survey were very similar. The numbers didn't change too terribly much. What we saw most often was emails, and the fact that that was the primary engagement, the use of emails to communicate with families. One thing that we found interesting as it related to one question, families reaching out to staff saying that they needed additional support and additional help with their children at home, particularly as it related to schoolwork. Staff noticed a greater need in that, which makes sense because we recently adopted a new curriculum for ELA, math, and science just over the end of the pandemic, and it makes sense that a lot of families needed an additional support, in particular with math. And so that is something that we've been able to address based on that information. Now, between our benchmark and our mid-cycle surveys, based on all of that data that we were able to compile, that was basically what our results looked like. So, which moves us to the next slide. Now, our next data was related to student assessment, and again, pre, during, and post-COVID. Next slide. Now, our goal and what we're looking for in student assessment is any learning loss. Also, any growth or progress between academic years. So that was our focus. And some things that we had to keep in mind and consider when we're talking about the data is, as I just mentioned, the implementation of a new ELA and math curriculum, which is less than 2 years old. That's certainly impacted and is reflected in the student scores, and you'll see that. Also, the demographic of students taking the test pre and post COVID, different enrollment, different groups of students due to matriculation and graduation rates. So the data is not reflecting the same group of students. Also, MAP, our MAP program actually revisited their assessments in 2019, right at the beginning of, or right before COVID. So the assessment itself has actually changed in terms of what it looks like. We provide no support in American Sign Language specifically for the reading portion of the MAP, so we're really able to capture the students' authentic actual reading level in English because we're not providing any additional support in American Sign Language. And that's a little bit different from what it was pre-COVID, and that's been a change, okay, because we modified our accommodations. And then, of course, distance learning. Our students having over a year of remote learning from March 2020 to February of 2021, and them actually having taken the MAP test during the fall from home and not in their typical academic setting also made an impact. Next slide. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about why we decided to use the MAP, Measure of Academic Progress, which we call the MAP, as part of our data, and we're reporting out on that. And the reason is we have used this assessment for over 5 years, so we have a wealth of historical data on it. We are able to analyze the student in the different disciplines, all within the context of one assessment. The MAP assessment is the only one that we were able to use during the pandemic. So we were able to still collect data during that time through distance learning. And also this type of assessment gives us rich data points. We get the median, for example, we're able to find the mean, and we're also able to derive the standard deviation when we look at our population on that bell curve. So we're able to get very rich data. Next slide. So again, not going to go through every single graph and every single metric. They will be posted online very soon. So I'm just going to encapsulate what things look like, because when you look at the website, you'll understand a little bit more about what some of these numbers represent. So we are comparing students in 2018 who were in second grade, okay, and we took an average of those scores, and then looking at a comparison when they were in third grade, fourth grade, all the way up through now. So this particular cohort, which went from second grade until sixth grade, so forth and so on. So all the students in 2018, okay? Now, some of these students have already graduated, and we wanted to have a wealth of data, so we just focused on second through eighth because they would still be with us in 2023. And you'll see 3 color-coded lines. Each color-coded line represents a different discipline, okay? And you'll see how their trajectory over the graph, of course. So one for English, for example, another for math. And even though we provide the map in the fall, winter, and spring, for these purposes, we're just showing a full year cycle based on our fall map testing only. In addition to that, some of the graphs you'll see later on when you look at the website, you'll see some gaps within that line. The reason being is because that might be a time where we had less than 10 students taking the test. And in those cases, we don't derive an average from that. We only derive when there's more than 10 students. That gives us the ability to actually find meaningful data. So let's look at the next slide to see some of our results. So from 2018 until 2023, okay, really 2019 to 2022, okay. Remember, we had sixth graders all the way up through eighth graders, so a total of 8 cohorts. 6 of those 8 showed growth. Even during our pandemic distance learning time, they continued to make progress, which is a good thing. The impact of COVID-19, if we look at 2018 through 2021, when the students took the test virtually at home, we wanted to see if there would be any detrimental scores. And we did notice that 7 out of the 8 cohorts continued to show growth with no decline, even though they were taking the test virtually. So that again was another good thing. So that's what our numbers are telling us at this point. Are there any questions? Okay, seems like there's no questions for you, Jessica. Thank you so much. Thanks for explaining how much COVID really impacted our academic progress. And now I'd like to take the opportunity to introduce Miss Daniela Halachek. She is our Columbia campus principal, and I'm going to turn the floor over to her. Thank you so much, Bella. Appreciate it. Good afternoon, everybody. So you've had the opportunity to see a variety of presenters talk about MSD's journey with our action research. Obviously, the goal is to improve our relationships with families and how we can leverage technology to do that. And the pandemic definitely changed our vision of what that would look like. And we now have certainly a different lens on how we can improve those relationships and how we can utilize technology to do it. So it has been a fascinating journey thus far. So I'm going to close us out with our mid-cycle research and talk a little bit about next steps in our process. So first and foremost, the impact of the pandemic itself. It really pushed us. We had to have students take classes online. We had to utilize a completely different approach in distance learning. We had to utilize hybrid approaches, going back and forth between distance learning and in person, while we continued to cope with just what was happening with the pandemic. And that had a huge impact on student learning in a variety of different ways with a variety of different results. Some students thrived in distance learning. Some students needed additional supports with using technology through distance learning. So it varied from student to student and family to family. And we were tailoring things in real time to support our students' learning. We realized that our curriculum needed an overhaul. It was time, particularly now with us utilizing more technology. The materials needed to be technology friendly, so to speak. So we looked at digital curriculums, we looked at hybrid curriculum, we looked at things that were in print as well as electronic, and really you're trying to curate things to meet the different learning styles and learning needs of our students. And we're providing a lot of training for our teachers on these new curricula. And we're getting more parent involvement in learning more about the curricula we offer and how to better support their children at home in accessing that learning. Thirdly, now there are so many more apps, platforms, and programs available. We've purchased a variety of different subscriptions from different companies, online subscriptions, for example, things that are better differentiated for our students, as well as for our specific demographic groups, our family ed, our middle schoolers, our high schoolers, our elementary schoolers, as well as our different needs of our various learners. So we're able to develop more resources to differentiate that learning and to figure out how to use these materials and how to give them to parents so they can apply them at home. We want to make them user-friendly for those parents, for everybody, really. It's been a trial and error process in finding what platform works best. Some things are appropriate for one age group and not appropriate for another. So we've had to utilize different companies to be able to meet those needs. And it has certainly been a journey as part of our self-study in terms of navigating what's out there and what's going to work best for us. Next slide, please. Okay, so our action research. There's always an upside and a downside to everything. Looking at what has worked, what has benefited us as a community, and where we need to maybe do some tweaking to make it a better fit for our school. How we can improve our relationships with our families. First and foremost, after COVID-19 and the learning loss that has happened, our students being at home, our teachers having to teach remotely, figuring out best practices for virtual learning, for example, particularly when it's an ASL modality. Remember, we are a bilingual approach here, so that involves signing as well as printed English, and communicating different ways electronically was a challenge. We're very fortunate that we were able to decrease the instances of learning loss. We moved very quickly and very proactively. We already had one-on-one devices for our students prior to the pandemic. So in that way, we were a little bit ahead of the curve in terms of us thinking about ordering things. And then when the pandemic happened, we had those devices ready to distribute instead of playing catch up. So the delay was less egregious, okay? And it wasn't as big of a gap, and we were able to minimize that learning loss that many students experienced. Also, families being able to jump in, people staying home with their children all day. They were able to work more with their children synchronously to support them in their learning. And it really became a team approach. It was definitely a collaborative effort between home and school that we hadn't previously experienced. Now, the previous presentations have mentioned over and over again the use of email and what an amazing communication tool that has been between home and school to just keep those communication channels open. We have adopted different platforms, Schoology, PowerSchool, One Call Now, those three specifically, each having a very distinct intended purposes with different benefits, and they've all been very useful for the MSD community so that parents can monitor what's goings on of their child's progress, so they can get information and data, so that they can get emergency notifications in real time. Any type of important community news has been pushed out via those three channels, and it keeps our families connected with our school. And then our fourth piece, the virtual option for our ASL classes. Debbie spoke to the marked increase in attendance, more families registering for those classes. More families registering for those classes means our children, our students have a better chance of having access to language at home with families that sign, okay? Which will then, of course, translate to better student outcomes. So all four of these have been huge strengths or benefits that we've noticed over the course of our action research. Next slide, please. Okay, so we talked about the gains. There are certainly some areas where we need to do a deeper dive, where we've noticed some challenges based on our action research. The first being the balance. We realize that there needs to be a balance. You can't have everything be virtually without any face-to-face interaction. There needs to be some in-person interaction that happens, in-person learning, that socialization with peers is so critical. Being present rather than doing everything via a screen is important and is not effective for everybody. And it's not effective for our families to completely operate via a screen. Some of our families need that in-person engagement. So striking that balance. The next piece is connections. We recognized, and we were working very diligently on connecting with families, and we recognize that those families also need to connect not only with the school, but with other families. Our platforms need to provide opportunities for those families to make those peer-to-peer connections with each other. To be, for example, families being able to participate in real time based on grade level, based on things like extracurricular activities like sports or being in the dorms. So really fostering those family-to-family connections is something that we're looking at. Our PSA and our PTCA, our parent school organizations, are another avenues for that. And then also the resource center that we envisioned setting up as part of our action research as a one-stop shop for information and resources to meet whatever the needs of that family has, be it child well-being, be it technological resources, be it ASL resources. So having that hub, that one-stop shop, we still definitely want to develop that as a centralized platform for our parents to be able to utilize rather than depending on departmental siloed communications. And that's something that we're still working on. It's definitely something that is beginning on our school website, and it is a work in progress. Hopefully we will see that come to fruition down the road, and we will have a one-stop platform for all our families that can meet all of their needs. So moving on to the next slide, let's talk about our next steps. So moving forward, first of all, we are envisioning, we had an ATP, an action team for partnership. This was a committee pre-pandemic that was comprised of teachers, parents, administration, community members, and students that came together to be a think tank of how to improve that rapport between families via technology. We're going to reinstitute that group and have them work moving forward on some of these ideas. In addition to that, we're going to review and revise our action research and look at our next steps. Remember, our vision has changed slightly based on what we've experienced and gone through and the trial and error that we've had. So we're going to utilize that to inform our next steps. As I mentioned before, that one-stop resource for families to access via a platform, and that can be for academic support, instructional purposes, social emotional learning. We want all the resources housed in one location, so it's a one-stop shop, so to speak, for our families. I mentioned our PTCA and our PSA, our parent school organizations. We want them to engage more with families and to elicit more family involvement. And then we're going to continue, of course, looking for different technologies and platforms as things become available that are accessible and user-friendly for our families and our different demographic groups, because we ultimately want more engagement with our families and more participation. So these are what we are envisioning for our steps moving forward, and we're very excited about it. Now, obviously, we have been very active. We've been very diligent in finding ways to serve our families despite any of the challenges. And it's really been our pleasure to work so closely with our families and with our communities and to learn from them. They have been wonderful at sharing their input, which then allows us to change what we're doing and to pivot as needed to meet their needs. So we'd like to thank the MSD community, our students, our staff, our families, and our community members for hanging in there and bearing with us as we've worked through this process and navigated this as we continue to look for and find best ways to approach and engage with all of our families. Thank you so much, Daniela, for your presentation and for bringing our colloquium to a very fitting end. Also, Oh, I'd like to thank our interpreter who's been interpreting. We had some technical difficulties with the other interpreter, so she was able to hang in there and provide access. So thank you so much. And if I could ask Bella to come up as well. Thank you, Mepper. So I'd like to extend gratitude and thanks to everyone who joined us this afternoon as we presented our mid-cycle action research. Thank you for listening and for engaging with your questions. We really appreciate your participation. And we look forward to our continued progress and our continued work to improve the future of Maryland School for the Deaf. So at this time, that concludes our colloquium. Everyone have a wonderful, wonderful afternoon. Take care, everyone. Thank you so much.